Welcome back to The Heat. We are talking about recent immigration changes in Australia that will impact the numbers of people entering the country. And joining us now too on our panel from Melbourne is Shen Narayanasamy. She is Human Rights Campaign Director with the activist group GetUp. Thanks so much for joining us from Melbourne. Sorry we couldn't get our satellite up in time for you to get in the first half of the show, so I'm going to give you a bit of time here. Before the break, we were talking about the impact of this new Australia First immigration program, the withdrawal of the 457 visa. And the point was made that this may affect the people who actually need it most. We're talking about refugees, we're talking about people whose English is not necessarily their first language. What's your view, Shen?
Well, we think it's really significantly concerning changes, and it's not actually just limited to the 457 visa changes. The government has also flagged a number of changes to accessing Australian citizenship, which look to make it significantly difficult for people, especially from the Asian region, to achieve Australian citizenship. And today they have also just announced changes to university entrance places to prevent permanent residents from accessing government subsidised places. So all of these changes combined lead us to a position that we really do see that Australia is in some ways aping America, or perhaps even harking back to the days of the Australia white-only policy that we used to have.
Shen, where in Asia do you think is going to be most affected by this, and what effect do you think it's actually going to have on what has been a very successful Australian mix for the last 70 years or so?
Well, it will have a really devastating impact. I mean, since 1975, when the White Australia policy was finally dismantled, Australia has become, over the last 40 years, one of the world's leading multicultural nations. And especially over the last 15 to 20 years, migrants from Asia, particularly from China and from India, have been at the forefront of entrance into Australia. And so what you see in our streets and in our cities is an incredibly diverse Australian population. And that didn't come about by accident. That came about based on an immigration policy that prioritised equality and allowed for people to access Australian citizenship. It had a rather fair approach to the English language. It acknowledged that Australia was contributed to by numerous migrants who didn't have the world's most perfect English levels. But frankly speaking, with these changes, we look to see a really disturbing impact. I mean, in effect, we know who this is going to impact. It's going to impact migrants from Asia.
Shen, I just want to ask you...
The English language standard that is being floated by the government at...
Sorry, I want to ask you one question before I bring in the rest of our panel again.
I was about to say Yes. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry, we got a bit of a delay there. One last question. Is there a rich and poor angle to this? Because what I don't see in this is immigrants who want to invest heavily in Australia. For example, we've seen a lot of Chinese investment come into Australia. It seems like the 457 and the other changes don't really affect that.
Yes, that's right, as far as I understand it. We have two special...
because it means that those...
Go ahead.
It means that those immigrant categories who wish to invest, they actually won't be able to access Australian citizenship. So it's kind of a situation of, well, we're happy to have your money and we're happy to have your cheap labour, to be quite honest about it. But we're not happy for you to access Australian citizenship and access university places and other benefits that come with that. And it's profoundly disturbing. It's going to create, some academics estimate, around 30,000 migrants a year that are unable to access citizenship. So essentially a two-tiered society in this country.
Adam, I want to move on to the upcoming visit of Malcolm Turnbull to Washington. It's the first time the two will meet face to face, but famously not the first time that they've spoken. Donald Trump managed to create headlines around the world by calling Malcolm Turnbull and talking about the dumb deal over the 1,250 refugees that the US had agreed to accept under the Obama administration. How are they going to turn this corner and get back on track?
Look, I think the two men will get on pretty well. I mean, at the end of the day, they have a lot in common. They're both very successful businessmen. They're both political outsiders. They're sharp talkers. So I think this is a good move. It came as a surprise. I wasn't expected this meeting. We just had the US Vice President in Australia just the other week. And he mentioned, of course, on that deal that America didn't really like the deal, but they would still honour it because of the extremely close relationship between the two countries for a long time, and so I think the Prime Minister's visit to New York will kind of cement those those somewhat frosty personal relations at the moment. But my sense is, though, that the media are somewhat exaggerated the nature of the call. I mean, of course, I wasn't there, but I think political leaders do have robust conversations from time to time, and this one was leaked. So I don't think the nature of the call was unusual. It's just the fact that it was leaked.
Linda Kirk, from a foreign policy point of view, what does Australia want to achieve by this visit to New York? It's going to be on a former aircraft carrier. What do they want to achieve in terms of the alliance and beyond?
I imagine that what Australia wants to do and what Prime Minister Turnbull wants to do is just cement and consolidate what has been a long-standing relationship between the two countries. I agree with Adam that I imagine that the two gentlemen will probably get along quite well. They do have a great deal in common, and it also seems, just from my observations, that President Trump is the kind of person who likes to meet people one-on-one and form his own view about a person once he's had interactions with them, and I imagine that he will get along very well with Prime Minister Turnbull, and I think that therefore bodes well for the continuing relationship between the two countries. As Adam said, one of the most important things from the time that President Trump was elected was the refugee deal, and of course there was some doubt around that, as has been said, but it seems that that is going to be honoured. So I imagine that they're going to kick off on a fairly good note, and I imagine that the conversations will be very cordial between the two, and it should be a positive meeting.
Shen, I'm going to give you the last word because you arrived late in Melbourne. It's quite interesting, isn't it, that these two men, we have an Australia first policy, America first policy, and the first disagreement they have is about where the world's poorest and most rejected are going to be placed, and saying, I don't want them, you have them, and all that sort of stuff. Where do you see this meeting going on that front?
I mean, I think it's not completely a done deal. There are 2,000 people that need to be resettled, and a large number of them are single men or fathers, etc., from Manus Island. And it doesn't seem 100% certain exactly how much the deal will be honoured. So I think there are still some concerns. But broadly speaking, it speaks to a really troubling thing. I think politically speaking, Malcolm Turnbull and President Trump are quite different people, but they are both starting to ape similar policies, and I think for what is perceived to be similar political gain, which is a worrying trend for us.
Well, Shen from Melbourne and both of our other guests in Sydney, thanks so much for joining us. Australia first, beyond the headlines and delving deep into the changes there in immigration and visa. That's it for this edition of The Heat. Thanks so much for joining us.